Layering is the answer. All right, Mr.
My coat, recognize it?
Ready to go, Mr. Chair.
We'll call this meeting to order of the Lakewood Planning Commission this October 4th, 2023. If staff could call roll.
Ryan Pearson,
Here.
Paul Wegman,
Present.
Luke Combs,
Present.
Lynn Larson is absent, Brian Parsons,
Here.
Robert Estrada,
Here.
Don Daniels.
Here.
You have quorum.
Thank you. But before us, we have the minutes of September 20th, 2023. I'm looking for a motion.
All motion. To
Mr.
approve.
All right, Mr. Pearson has made a motion. Do I have a second?
I will Pearson will second.
Parsons made the motion. Pearson. Oh, man. Can we change your names, and all right, great. So we have a first and a second. Any changes, objections, nothing hearing? Okay, so all those in favor by saying aye? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Hearing none, minutes passed as written. Any changes to our agenda?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we'll open up the public comment period at this time. And we see no one signed up in our audience tonight. I don't see anyone online.
No.
So we'll close the public comment period at this time. We have no public hearing. So we move right to number 7, unfinished business, the action on the recommendation regarding the 2023 annual development regulations. Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just walking through this briefly for everyone's benefit. As you know, that you already had a study session and a public hearing regarding the 23 annual development regulations that are under consideration. The way this is scheduled right now is if Planning Commission takes action tonight, then it would be moving on to the City Council October 23rd, I believe, is when they would pick this up. But to very quickly go over the 12 amendments, the first is allowing standalone truck and trailer parking in industrial zones. The second is to allow electric fencing in the commercial and transit-oriented commercial zones. The third is further clarifying the definition for unusual use. The fourth is to correct inconsistencies regarding binding site plan amendments between 2 Lakewood Municipal Code titles. The fifth is to consolidate and update all of our sign code administration into one place to make sure it is consistent for those who utilize the code. The sixth is to update appeal timeframes in land use decisions and SEPA in order to make sure they're consistent with state law and with each other. The seventh is allowing clarifying what flex space means and where it can be done. The eighth is to clarify manufactured and mobile home land use language in tables and code because there was some redundancy because they were both mentioned, both the parks and then the homes themselves. The ninth is to update lot size standards in mixed residential 2 zone. The 10th is to update the discussion regarding Air Corridor 1 and Air Corridor 2, which are city zones, as opposed to the ACUs for Joint Base Lewis McChord accident potential zones 1 and 2. They were used somewhat confusingly in the code, so this is a cleanup. The 11th is one that you've had public comment on in support regarding expanding the number of land use zones in the city that allow childcare facilities. And what this would do is opening up opportunity in Springbrook and Lakeview, which are currently identified childcare deserts within Lakewood. The 12th Amendment is where there's been the most conversation among Planning Commission members, and this is regarding updating the regulations about accessory dwelling units in reaction to House Bill 1337, which is passed this last spring by the state legislature. The city staff has recommended to the planning commission that there be a prohibition on using ADUs as short-term rentals. But as you know, you've had conversations among yourselves about qualifying that or taking some other action. So we continue to hold that same recommendation to you, but you obviously have the purview to make the recommendation you wish in your resolution to city council. The language here is what was suggested at the last meeting for you to discuss. There was a reaction and message sent to me by Commissioner Combs, and I'm sure he can speak for himself and explain, but essentially it was looking at the third line here, talking about limiting the use of an ADU as a short-term rental for only up to 30 days a year. So if there's any other discussion, please feel free to have that this evening as well on this amendment. And then as it stands right now, what's in your packet is proposed resolution 2023-03. And as it sits, all of the other 11 amendments are as they have been since the start. And then number 12 still continues to say no use of ADUs as short-term rentals. So if the commission wants to change that, you'll need to do an amendment before you adopt that resolution for council review.
Great. All right, so any questions on 1 through 11? Is any questions on 1 through 11? How about number 12? Mr. Combs, would you like to, what you wrote to the city? And
Tiffany, could you put on the screen?
Yeah, I guess I didn't review the email since I sent it, but I guess there are some feelings expressed last time that is this really what we're trying to do is limit the amount of housing that gets developed. And whether it's used for short-term rental or not, I think is different. There's also some of the concern had to do with why they were opposed to it. And I don't know how many incidents we have of noise or parting. But without that information, I'm not sure that I could make a good decision on that being a driving force to not have ADUs be used for short-term rental. And in my mind, I think it's more important to get the housing available and in stock, and the market will shift. We're seeing that all over the country, Arizona, Phoenix being a hotspot where people were building for ADUs and now are converting back to long-term rentals. And that's something that is a benefit to the community now because it solves some of their housing issues. Now, their area that goes through really high and really lows, we have a long ways before we can catch up. And so for me, I think that we have even more reason to go after and get any reason to do it. The 30-day deal, the reason why that's a problem is because if you're going to finance or justify building it, you can't plan on 30 days of the year. No one will finance that. You have to have a certain level of occupancy to make it justified, and 30 days will not get it done. So from a practical application, it just doesn't make sense. So that being said, if we and I think that if there's noise and other issues, parties or something, those should be addressed through the system. And if we're having an ongoing issue, we can either address it through, that could be addressed through law enforcement, or if this really is that type of unicorn, then let's address the problem through zoning and regulation or statute later, rather than trying to say no and then adjust for it to allow options in. I'd rather go the other way.
Mr. Estrada? You do,
but I'll wait till the end.
okay, Mr. Pearson.
So I agree with Mr. Combs generally, and so one of the other topics that was brought up in the previous meeting was to add some, more that people have to have a permit and these different enforcement actions. And my question is that already in the ADU code or the short-term rental code that they have to have a business license and they have to meet these things? So we're not missing out on any of that. That's already covered in the short-term rental portion. There's nothing else that we would need to add in there really, right?
Where we're probably going to have to make some review and change if this were to go forward and get adopted is the level of potential traffic and parking issues, because we in the city do not permit on-street parking. So if you suddenly have an influx of additional ADUs where there is not enough on-street parking for those renters, vacationers, whatever you want to call them, that may be an issue that the city needs to deal with. In terms of regulation of short-term rentals, that's already handled in code.
Okay, and then following up on the 30-day a year, it's really not feasible to have, you're not going to have a long-term tenant either because they have to be out every year for a month. And so then you're kind of in this weird situation where, yeah, we're going to have short-term renters, but then we only want to have like 9 or 10 month renters, and no one wants to, be constantly moving, every 9 months. So the market for that, I feel like is a bit smaller. I'll reiterate on my point from the previous meeting. I have some friends that are in this line of work, and their business model is when they flip a house or when they, if they're going to keep it on their, their books, they're making it nice and fun and, clean, and they're going to use it as a short-term rental for a few years, 2, 3, 4, 5 years until it's considered, used. And then at that point in time, then it really becomes, just a long-term rental. And so it really, in my opinion, I think Mr. Combs has said this in the past, that the answer to more affordable housing is just more housing. And if we're getting more housing, then let's open it up and get the houses in here and let people, use them how they're going to use them. And if, there's not a market for 1,000 short-term rentals in Lakewood. So, if we build 1,000 ADUs in Lakewood, they're not going to be rented out for short-term rental. It's like, there's not that many people that were, so then, the market will kind of guide itself to see, okay, yeah, a lot of these people are going to turn these into, long-term rentals. So that would be my comments.
Mr. Wakeman?
I agree with both those comments. I think we allow the market, free market will force either the owners or builders of those things to change their model, whatever it is they start out with. You have lots of ideas and then it starts working. You go, oh, that's not working so well for me, or it's really working well. And so we want people to invest their resources in things that make our community better. And so building additional housing is a good thing. The question I have though is the legislature has passed some legislations that are trying to force us to do something. Is there an impact against us, to the city if we don't follow what their guidance is?
Well, House Bill 1337 says you must allow so many ADUs per lot on areas where it's traditionally been single family only. So the city has to allow in its zoning that ADUs can be built. There is nothing in the bill that says the city has to make anybody build ADUs. There's nothing that says you have to prohibit or not short-term rentals. The option is included in the bill to say, as a jurisdiction, we are not going to allow ADUs to be used as short-term rentals. And that's the subject of discussion right now. But where we're going with this, and I think the Planning Commission is fine with, is we will be adopting what we need to in order to comply with 1337.
Well, I guess my position then is I would allow the people that invest in these properties to allow the free market to determine where we go.
Mr. Pearson?
Yeah, so similar comments, similar to what I said last meeting. I think more housing is more housing, and we have to have it however we get there. And this seems like this is the best incentive to do it. When I look at the cost, even to build 1,000 square feet, on a cap rate, it doesn't make sense to potentially not do some of the short-term rental to get it in the system in the first place. And I think, like we're saying, over time, it's gonna fall out and we're not gonna have 10,000 short-term rentals. We're gonna have more. And so I think I'm fully supportive of that. One thing, and it's probably not for here, but that I've seen some other towns do. I know Portland, if you don't do a short-term rental, their permit fees are almost free to encourage ADU. And then Spokane, I think, has a 3-year tax exemption where it doesn't increase your taxes for 3 years. So that's one way if we wanted to encourage people to do long-term rent, we could put out some incentives to help with that. And then again, let the free market build this as it comes. It's really smart.
Great, good comment. Mr. Estrada.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I asked to wait till the end because I've been waffling on this. I have rentals and I have property in which I could do ADUs. So I look at it from a perspective of not bad. I could make some money on the short-term rentals. But then, and I could make some money with short-term rentals, but I don't think it's going to work that way. Because as was pointed out, who is going to want to rent for on a month to month, knowing that at some time around, I get booted out with all my furniture that I brought in because I'm not going to rent a place fully furnished with all my stuff to go out and then have to look for another place. So I'm not going to look at these ADUs for rental. And on the other side, that means that I, as a landlord, probably not going to get people that are going to want to rent for just a few months, that was pointed out. And therefore, I'm going to hold on to my empty place until I can get that event that comes to town that I can charge 4 times the going rate because I know I can do it and get it for that 1 or 2 months. And as was pointed out, the cost for 1,000 square feet ain't going to work. So it's a no-win for either side, from my perspective, if we go to short-term rentals, from my perspective. And on the other hand, also remember that what was the intent of 1337? Not for short-term rentals, but to bring housing to our community.
Okay. So I do have a comment as well. If the law or regulation is already there, so anyone that has a rental property, short or long-term, they have to have a business license. Like
Correct.
they have to also belong or join or participate in the rental safety
The
program.
rental housing safety program, yeah,
But they
they
have
would
to
need
do
to
that.
register that, yeah.
Okay, so I think as Mr. Buer pointed out, some of the stories that staff has to address and put up with some of these past experiences. A lot of those don't have probably a business license.
Correct.
They're not under that rental safety program. So I think that this, definitely those would have to be addressed, long or short term, for these ADUs. They're rentals, so that is a requirement. We should go after, if we know those other units are rentals, they should be able to participate and required to buy those other items. I agree. I've talked to several people in our community with available properties that they're excited to have ADUs. They would absolutely, they're in the process of penciling out. They're already been to architects and looking at the cost. And I agree, the cost is going to be just to build something and wait for a long-term rental. Could possibly sit there for a while to get the right tenant, just the fit for that, situation. I think the only way they look at this thing is they really need the option to have a short-term rental. Once they invest, and it might take a while to get a long-term rental. So their options without that might detour them to even making that property or that ADU. That's the way that I look at it. If I built something and I have the option, I'm gonna want to get return for my investment as fast as I can. So if I had to sit there and wait, and I only have 30 days to have a short-term rental, those are the people that are from out of town. They're not the people that are gonna move in your furniture, even if it was fully furnished. No one wants to come in there for 30 days and just move on something that's looking to reside in the city of Lakewood. They're gonna want to find something a lot longer. They can go to some of our motels or hotels in the Lakewood and have those month by month by month type of rental units furnished. So I'm in pretty much the same favor as Mr. Combs and many of you others that says, let's maybe just take out that 30 days. Don't have a time, days, months, whatever it is. We do allow short-term, long-term in our ADUs, regardless of X amount of days or not. So that's my personal feeling. Just like I said, I had a lot of conversation on, especially around the properties, the larger lots that we're talking about. We always had in the past, no one wants to condense their zoning in some of those areas. They wanted their same, hey, listen, I got this big old lot and I'm gonna leave it like that, So they didn't want to downsize. So here's an option. Now they might say, hey, this might fit in very well for me. I don't have to, the zoning is kind of gone by the wayside, but still, this might be an opportunity to accomplish sooner than later on these ADUs. So that's my, yes, Mr. Weigman.
I have an additional comment, when we look at some of the homeless situations, you have faith-based groups that are trying to help those people, and where do they put them? And I've had people, when one of the trailer parks had some of the lowest cost places that they could use it. So if we have additional places for people to live, whether they be ADU or not, a faith-based group could come in and maybe help people get started that way. I think as a community, we want to be one that's welcoming to help people as we move forward. The only other concern that I've heard tonight is this issue of parking. How do we deal with that? There's a housing area just across the Puyallup River, in the Fife area. And they've got those houses stacked in there so tight, you come home in the evening, I do repair work. And so you're trying to find a place to park your vehicle close to help. So, is there a way to address that? I don't know what the whole answer is there.
Yeah, I think you can address that. The parking is going to be, there's some kind of parking regulations that have to fit into this whole scenario. Is that not correct?
That's correct. So the city already has a parking
Yeah,
code in place.
Yeah.
But under both House Bill 1337, which is specific to the ADUs, and also House Bill 1110, which is the one that says, the other one that really densifies cities and says middle housing units, anything from duplex to townhome condos, 6+, et cetera. They both have requirements and limitations on what cities can do regarding parking.
Mhm.
And they both talk about the closer you are to a transit station. So in Lakewood, the Pierce Transit Center right here, the Sounder Station, and actually down in Tillicum, because it's planned to have another Sounder Station there someday. There, you're actually limited more on what kind of parking you can require, because the assumption is the higher density, the proximity to transit, that's what you're using. So regardless of what we're talking about, whether or not you want to limit the 30 days or not, there will be changes to our parking requirements and regulations, because both of those bills say we have to.
Yes.
So,
Pearson.
yeah, I regardless of if it's short or long term, they're still gonna have the same parking requirements from the state level, right? I mean, that's,
The state level just says if it's an ADU, this is what you cannot do with parking, correct?
okay, so, you know, I guess I'd step back and say, why, if we have however many hundred short-term rentals, why do we not have, you know, why do those folks not have business licenses? Why do they not have some of these things? And so, you know, we are holding a building certificate and that's a powerful document. And why aren't we getting or requiring, or can we require that some of these items are done before we sign off? And have that, like, you know, if the parking, you know, if the concern for these short-term rentals is that they're gonna have a whole bunch of parking,
Mhm.
you know, associated with them. I've stayed in places where the tenant or the, you know, the property owner said, hey, you know, absolutely no more than 2 cars in the driveway, you will get a ticket and it'll be added and, you know, and it's monitored and the neighbor can call it in or whoever can call it in. And, you know, they'll get fined and stuff. And so, you know, how do we get that, those, whatever those documents are, I don't know if it's I don't know what the document is for a short-term rental, but how do we make them do that prior to certificate of occupancy if they're, you know, as like, and maybe initially it's not intended to be a short-term rental, but is there any way that we can say, well, you're building an ADU, so if you decide to do short-term rentals, by the way, you're only allowed to have 2 parking or whatever the parking, you know, and can we incorporate some of that in there? That's not really for discussion tonight. That's a whole different thing, but that's just kind of where my mind goes is like,
Yeah, and if I could answer briefly, Mr. Chair, from what I understand, there's about 145 unlicensed ADUs in the city right now. And those are not necessarily new construction converted. Those are unpermitted garage conversions, interior to a house, unpermitted stuff. So it's not that the city isn't doing something because it knows about it. It's not doing something because it doesn't know about it until somebody happens to see it on the Airbnb website. It's a Lakewood address that is advertising a short-term rental that's never gone through the permitting or approval process. So part of the concern from the city is also if this opens up and is allowed for short-term rentals wherever these ADUs are built, how many more non-conforming,
Oh.
meaning non-compliant with city code things might appear?
Yeah.
If you do have the engagement by that property owner into the permitting process, you're absolutely right. You don't get to open this until you have your business license. These are the rules you have to follow if you're converting, remodeling, or adding a new unit. But it's just those that simply don't play by the rules. That's what we're looking at right now.
okay, thank you.
Any other comments? None? All right. So before us, we have these 2023 annual development regulations, 1 through 12. We've kind of made a discussion. Does anyone want to make a motion to send to the council? Anyone want to make a motion?
Do we typically, I'll make a motion. Do we typically make the motion for the first 11 and then do the 12 separately or have, or?
It's
You
the
can-
pleasure of the commission. If
If-
the consensus of the group is that what you want to do is remove that third item, that's the qualifying thing, you could do that all in one motion where they're all approved, you make the amendment and then you pass it as amended.
I think that the.
Go ahead.
I don't know if
What-
it's
go ahead.
consensus, But I'll make the motion. I'll make a motion to, where are we at here? To approve resolution 2023-03, formalizing the planning commission's recommendations regarding 2023 annual development regulations and forwarding recommendations to Lakewood City Council for consideration and action. And I would like to make an amendment to Amendment 12.
Can I
Yeah.
act parliamentarian for a second?
Yep.
We need to get a second
Yep.
from somebody to get it out for discussion and then the amendment can occur.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we had a motion. Do we have a second?
We're recommending 1 through 11 right now.
1 through 12.
Well,
The
yeah.
whole package and then
The whole
amend.
package,
then
then
amend
he's gonna
12.
make amendment.
I think I'd like to recuse myself from number 12. So I would,
Okay,
because I think, I just feel like I want to keep everything as arm's length as possible. I'm like
okay.
my good friend here, I'm close enough to it that I'm just going to keep my distance on that.
Okay, so do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, there, so we have a second on the 1 through 12 of the 2023-03. Now, Mr.
And I would like to make a motion to amend amendment 12 to strike out item D, the accessory dwelling units of any type shall not be used as a short-term vacation rental.
That I think is up to the commission to talk about, whether you want to not prohibit them at all or whether you want to say there's these additional qualifying conditions. So if you bear with me, I'll open up what's actually in the resolution as it sits right now, just to make it really clear.
Yeah.
Sorry, don't get dizzy.
Yeah,
Actually, let me just do this. Okay, so the way it sits right now, to start at the beginning of amendment number 12, there is the addition of the language you see here, defining permanent residential occupancy, short-term rental advertisement, short-term rental platform. Then there's a change to the lodging table conditions, which are the development and operating conditions for short-term rentals. And this is number D that Mr. Pearson just mentioned. However, there's also in this amendment a change to another table, which is the residential uses. Coming down again into operation and development conditions. And you'll see the same language is here regarding ADUs in subsection M. So if you would like, you could remove that language altogether, or maybe you want to go back into those 3 other conditions where the property owner has to be on site, that sort of thing. It's up to you, but that's what your amendment reads like right now. If you want to do just the removal, I would suggest not only item D, but item M in the other part of that resolution.
Okay, so sorry, I was missing that then. One of the items is that to be on site. I thought
Yeah.
that wasn't.
I'm sorry, let me
That get
bring it back
added?
up. So this was presented to the Planning Commission on, I want to say September 20th. If it's going to be used for 30 days or less at any one time, the owner must occupy 1 unit on the parcel while it's being used as a short-term rental. And on parcels with more than 1 ADU, the ADUs are prohibited from being used as short-term rentals unless there is adequate parking on site. Those are the 2 things in addition to the no more than 30 days a year. So if the commission wishes, you could simply remove the language out of subsection D and subsection M that Mr. Pearson just raised and said, get rid of that prohibition altogether. And or you could add this language in to add a little more sideboards to how ADUs as short-term rentals could be operated. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I guess I'm sorry, Mr. Pearson, what you could do is suggest, if you're supportive of it, adding the language of those first 2 bullets on this sheet, as well as removing subsections D and M out
Okay.
of the resolution.
except for, go back one more slide.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, if you could. So
I would also propose to, if I'm still making my motion here, remove D and M, and then also add in just item 2 here.
Okay.
So I would not include the owner occupy while it's in a short-term rental, or the ADU as a short-term rental for more than
So what you're
removing
doing,
both of those, I guess, or I
I'm
don't,
sorry.
I don't know why do we need item 3 on there, I guess?
Item 3 is what most of you have said you do not want, which is that limitation of 30 days a year as a
yes,
short-term rental.
Yeah.
So if I'm understanding you correct, Mr. Pearson, what you're suggesting is, in addition to what's already in your resolution for Amendment 12, first thing would be to remove items D and M, which talk about you can't do it at all. So that prohibition would be gone, but you do want to add in this language regarding On parcels with more than one ADU, they're prohibited from being used as short-term rentals unless there's adequate parking on site.
Correct.
Okay.
But remove the owner occupy.
Right.
Yeah.
Those other two you would not be adding in. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you for, hopefully everyone else understands that motion. and
So we,
remembers.
so we do have that motion. Is everyone pretty clear on what the motion was of Mr. Pearson? Okay, so do I have a second on that motion, on that amendment?
I'll second.
Mr. Okay, any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, or do you want to call roll? How about that? So then what your decision? How about calling roll for approval of 1 through 12 with that motion amendment that Mr. Pearson so eloquently?
Do you want to do an approval of the amendment first and
Yes.
then
Okay.
approve it as
Okay.
amended?
Yes,
Okay.
okay, so we'll do that. So if you could call roll on the amendment first.
Yes.
Aye.
Recuse.
Yes.
No.
Yes. Okay, so that motion passes. So we did have a motion on 1 through 12. And we had Mr. Who made the motion first? I think Mr. Pearson.
Mr. Pearson did the
Yeah,
original and
yep.
Mr. Parsons did the second.
Second, okay, so then, so here we go. So on those 1 through 12 again, so we have first and a second, and do we have any discussion? No, hearing none. Okay, so all those in favor, oh, yes, Mr.
So how is that going to work?
Mhm.
1 through 12 as amended, approve or disapprove, since I did not agree with the amendment, then I will have to disagree with the whole thing.
No,
That is up to you, Mr.
I
Estrada.
mean, I
you
can't,
don't,
say I agree with 1 to 11, but not 12.
Yeah.
Because it's
okay,
passing.
so if you want, we can do 1 through 11. Make a motion to approve 1 through 11. Make second. We'll vote on that. And then we'll go back to number 12.
Okay,
How about that?
I like that.
Okay, perfect. So let's start over. So I'm looking for a motion, 1 through 12, excuse me, 1 through 11 in the 2023.
We have a point of order. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Didn't we just make a motion, have a second and a vote that said we approved all those? Didn't we
No,
just do
no,
that?
no, no. We only made a vote on the amendment
amendment.
to number 12.
Oh, okay. I missed that.
Yeah.
When you said 1 through 12,
Yeah,
so with the amendment. Okay.
so we're gonna do 1 through 11. So I need a motion for 1 through 11. Yes, Mr.
Just clarification, because of his question now. Do you still agree with his motion to add short-term rentals?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
What's the,
There was an amendment basically to allow short-term rentals. And that's what we voted on initially. That's why I said no, and you all said yes. But did you understand that that's what it was? That we were
That
by
we
this
voted
motion
on this last
allowing
meeting.
short-term rentals?
I'm sorry, that we allow short-term rentals?
Yes.
Yes, I agree
Okay.
with
You agree
that.
with
Yeah.
that? Okay, I'm just
Yeah.
asking because.
Yeah.
the Question.
If he was, he wasn't sure. Absolutely. Okay, so clarification again, we're gonna look for 1 through 11 on the 2023 annual development regulations presented before us. I'm looking for a motion to approve or deny those.
I'll make a motion to approve it as written
Okay.
and
Okay,
use the vernacular that was on the screen.
no problem. Absolutely. 1 through 11 for Mr. Combs made a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll
Second.
second it.
Mr. Estrada, thank you. Mr. Estrada will
We like-
second it. Okay, any changes? None, hearing none, so we'll take a vote on 1 through 11 as presented to us and pass it on to the city council. All those in favor by saying aye? Aye. Opposed? No, abstentions? No. So 1 through 11 passes as written. Thank you. Okay, now we go back to number 12. And I'm looking for a motion on number 12 presented to us with Mr. and approved of the making a motion for number 12 with the amendment presented and passed with 1 no. So now I'm looking for a motion on that.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay,
Second?
we got the Pearson Parson group again. Thank you for both of those. Any discussion? No. Yes, Mr.
Restate the
Wakeman.
motion now again. So what are we doing here? To make sure I understand. We keep bouncing around from my
Nope,
perspective.
no problem. So we're gonna approve or disapprove number 12 with the amendment to strike
The 30
the
day.
short, yes, the short term 30 days, correct. So that's what we're gonna vote on now.
Okay.
Okay, all the rest stays the same on number 12 with the striking, okay? So go ahead and call roll.
Yes.
Aye.
Recuse.
Yes.
Nay, no.
Yes. Thank you. Hey, yeah, yeah, no, go Mr. Estrada.
When it goes to the council,
Mhm.
from my perspective, let it be known that it wasn't a full agreement.
Yeah, they will have that in our minutes and they will have all that, absolutely.
Yes, what I will do, Mr. Estrada, is as we sometimes do with public comment, we'll say X person said this and this was the city's response. I'll do a similar table that says this is what each of the planning commission comments were tonight regarding amendment 12 and the outcome and then how that informed the resolution.
In Mr. Estrada, that's the reason why I had them, the staff go one by one on those votes. So that shows to a record instead of just, voices saying yay, nay. So
Okay,
is that good?
thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Appreciate it. All right, that's what we get paid the big bucks for. Okay, now we move to new business, 2024 comprehensive plan periodic review.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This isn't new business in terms of being the 24 periodic review, obviously. But what we are going to go through tonight is just an overview of how House Bill 1181, which was passed this last spring by the legislature, is affecting the ongoing 24 periodic review. So we've talked about House Bill 1220, which a couple of years ago said you have to now plan for housing by area median income bracket. We talked tonight about 1337 and a little bit about 1110, which say ADUs now where single family has been before and middle housing where single family has been before. 1181 is a different focus from the legislature. This is another high priority for them right now, and it relates to climate change. So the bill itself talks about the following elements needing to be updated: land use, capital facilities, utilities, transportation, parks and recreation, and then in our case, updating our energy and climate change chapter. They call it in state law a climate change and resiliency element. So what we have started to do is already go through those other elements just to see what we otherwise would have needed to update. But now with 1181, there's a little bit new nuance to the analysis, and we just wanted to bring that to you as a high level review. So within the land use element, you have to talk about green spaces and urban and community forests. And as you know, there's been a tree code in recent years adopted, and as part of the climate change chapter, which the city already has, there's been conversation about tree canopy and the fact that there's a tree canopy goal in Lakewood of 40% citywide by the year 2050. And as part of the implementation of our climate change chapter, there's also been conversation about the creation of an urban forestry program. The urban forestry program has not launched yet. It probably won't launch until the 24 update is done. However, the American Rescue Plan Act funds that the city was awarded a few years ago, there's been about $340,000 set aside in that process toward the urban forestry program. And the second piece was that some of you may be familiar with the recent Panattoni warehouse development in Lakewood. When they developed that site, they had to do quite a bit of tree mitigation fees because of what they took down. That total fee was, I think, $418,000. Yeah, so that money is also now set aside for the creation of the urban forestry program. So with those two buckets sitting there ready to go, when the time comes, when there's the capacity on staff to take this on, we will be able to start to do some good work, I think. Also, just so you're aware, earlier this week, Dave Buer and I were on a call with the Tacoma Tree Foundation, and they are tracking where other cities are as well, but they wanted to talk to Lakewood about its urban forestry and tree canopy and planning right now. And they actually potentially have some low or no cost support to residents who may want to plant trees just whenever. So we're going to explore that a little further. And if something can start next year, rather than having to wait for the creation of this program and people want to start planting trees, they're able to do that. There's also this now new requirement to really focus on environmental justice in goals and policies. There's also reducing vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, per capita for people, and in reducing those vehicle miles traveled without increasing greenhouse gas or GHG emissions. And then also looking at wildfire risk. So if you remember, I brought you a really low resolution and yucky looking map, but it was showing you much of Western Lakewood down into Tillicum. Because of the trees that are there, there's actually a wildfire risk. And so this is yet another instance of competing policies. Are we going to go with density with housing? Are we going to go with climate protection? Are we going to go with wildfire avoidance or prevention? There's all these things that we're trying to juggle.
Ms. Spears,
Yeah.
before you go on, just a comment is this weekend at the old game farm. I forget what it's called now on Phillips Road. I believe what's it called? The Wildlife Refuse area. Anyway, they're planting trees this Saturday out there.
Oh, great. Okay.
So they were asking for volunteers, but I just noticed that came up. So there is efforts throughout the community to, and they have tons of space out there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that there's options to plant some more trees out there.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Isn't that a fish farm?
There was a fish hatchery and peacocks and all that stuff. Yes, Mr. Wegeman.
I have a math question.
Mhm.
On that third bullet, it says, reduce per capita vehicle miles traveled without increasing greenhouse gas emissions. If you're going to reduce the amount of driving, isn't that automatically going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? I don't understand that statement or equation. What does it mean?
To put it very simply and probably somewhat inaccurately, this is saying things like reviews. If you say we're going to reduce vehicle miles traveled in Lakewood by telling people go ride the ferry, and that in turn increases greenhouse gas emissions by the ferry system in Kitsap County or up into King County, that's what they're talking about. Or reducing vehicle miles traveled in the city of Lakewood by suggesting that a certain type of business is not be located here, so people don't drive to Lakewood from some other county to come to that business. It's a complicated, and you're right, math question, but the idea is you are not making yourself look good in city X by causing problems elsewhere. It's taking into account the larger picture.
I mean, okay. I mean, that's a little bit common sense, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if we live downstream, the people upstream dump their sewer in the stream upstream from us, then it messes us up. So that's what they're getting at.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just, when I first read that, it just doesn't make logical sense.
That's just the language of the bill, unfortunately. Any other questions?
Nope.
Okay, So in the capital facilities element, there is a new requirement, green infrastructure must be identified. And that is also a very broad term, but if you want to think low impact development in terms of road or sidewalk construction, if you want to think green stormwater ponds, water retention, detention systems, even if you want to talk about green roofs, if there's a jurisdiction that wants green roofs encouraged on its commercial and or residential buildings, but identifying that. And then also looking at the good faith effort Lakewood has to engage in to get all of the public entities that own capital facilities information into the city's element. And so that's old story. I know you know this, but the city not owning its utilities, for instance, we are in close coordination with power, water, sewer entities to try to get that information. In the utilities element itself, so a little bit redundant, but here again, needing to know exactly where things are and where they're going to be proposed, including electrical, telecommunications, and natural gas. And then also making sure that in the utilities element that information is added into from those other third-party utilities. Transportation, this is probably where the biggest changes are in terms of this new bill. You have to talk about forecasting multimodal transportation, and you also have to balance transportation system safety and convenience to safely, reliably, and efficiently provide access and mobility to people and goods. So this is looking at, and I don't know how we're going to do this or others will do this, but we need to be somehow looking at forecasting where, for instance, the transit agencies are going to have development of their system or where they see demand coming from. We'll probably be able to say things like, given the fact that we have to now densify all of our single family neighborhoods with ADUs or middle housing, there will be an increase in transportation demand on those road systems, right? But talking about forecasting where it may happen in the future, we'll have to, again, really rely on Pearson Sound Transit, as well as take a look at what kind of analysis we can come up with based on the housing changes that are coming from 1110 and 1337. There also needs to be multimodal safety benefit identified. There needs to be inventory of active transportation facilities, meaning something other than driving your car, walking, biking, electric biking, what have you, have to also be identified. There has to be an inventory and also a level of service standards. And then there has to be an ADA transition plan. So some of this is in place in Lakewood to some extent, but we'll need to brush it all off and make sure it meets the standards and minimums that are required in the bill.
Excuse me, one
Sure.
other question, if I could. Has the city addressed when they call transportation, those little electric scooter things, those little bikes or whatever they call them, we stand on them, and is that been addressed within the city? I know we don't have any at the current time, but have you heard anything?
I have
about
not
that?
heard anything other than when you are doing with complete street planning, you have to plan for all of those modes. And that's a relatively recent mode to be added to
Yes.
the list. But that is something that is supposed to be incorporated into our transportation capital improvement plans.
Yeah, I see a surrounding city
Yeah.
close by, just pulled the plug on
Right.
those type of
Yeah.
mobility.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, I hope they're not thinking about having a service come in and sell us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
okay.
just as an aside, I'm from Alaska, and
Uh.
when I was growing up, it was bike lane,
Yeah.
sidewalk, road.
Yeah.
And everybody had their place to be. There was never a bike on the street with cars. There wasn't a scooter or a skateboarder. And so to me, this idea of trying to force a road being shared by cars and then non-cars is dangerous. It doesn't make a lot of sense, particularly when you have a very empty sidewalk right next to it. So
Yep.
there's actually, from what I understand, there's conversations happening with the Building Code Council and others about what can and should be allowed on sidewalks,
Mhm.
as well as what does complete streets mean in
Right.
2023.
Okay. No problem, sorry.
In Parks and Recreation, talking about making sure we cover tree canopy coverage within that element. So that's already in hand. We've taken care of that. In the climate change and resiliency element, this will be a matter for us again to go back to our existing chapter that the commission looked at a few years ago now, and make sure that it is responsive to what this bill requires. But you see that it needs to be divided into talking about both reducing greenhouse gas emissions and also looking at a climate change resiliency set of policies.
Hmm.
And resiliency, if you want to think of it in terms of what we already adopted, it's like, we know that climate change is coming. It's already started to make a difference in weather patterns, et cetera, flood, sea level rise. So those kinds of things would be under resiliency in terms of, okay, knowing that that's coming, what is the city doing with its capital facilities, for instance, to make sure that they're going to survive these more intense storm events, whether it's you're right at sea level, so I got to make sure things are not going to get flooded, whether it's heat resistant, whatever, because temperatures are going up or down, those kinds of things need to be handled now within this resiliency sub-element. Commerce is supposed to give us some guidance, which I think actually most local governments will welcome, because this is such a large encompassing bill and is telling us we have to do this, but we really don't know what it means. So by the end of this year, we do expect something coming from Commerce that we as a jurisdiction who has to finish its comprehensive plan periodic review by next year, we can at least compare what we've already adopted to that and see if changes are needed. And then we also, again, there's discussion here, a set of measures that have a demonstrated ability to increase housing capacity or reduce GHG emissions, allowing for consideration of the emission reductions achieved through the adoption of statewide programs. So the other thing that's a little complex here is that the state and then the region, the Puget Sound region, they're also doing climate change planning. And so we're trying to avoid being cart before the horse, make sure that anything we were to do as Lakewood isn't going to be out of step with what, again, Puget Sound or the state is going to adopt. But we also need to be looking at increasing housing capacity on top of all of this. So again, multiple layers. The sub-element, again, Commerce is going to provide us some guidance and we'll be taking a look at that. But reduction of overall GHG emissions, reduction in per capita vehicle miles traveled. Looking here again, environmental justice and looking at overburdened communities. Here in Lakewood with the bifurcation by I-5, right through some of the most stressed areas of the city, meaning Tillicum, Woodbrook, Springbrook, Lakeview, they're all right along I-5. And so their air quality over time has worsened because of the proximity to the interstate. How Lakewood does anything other than acknowledge that that's the case, I couldn't tell you right now, but that's something we do need to address and acknowledge. But you cannot restrict as a city population growth or allocation to meet the greenhouse gas reductions. So we can't say, oh, our air quality is so bad, we just can't accept any new housing. They're not going to let us do that either. So resiliency, talking about that one more time, we need a hazard mitigation plan, which you already do have in place, but we'll update it. And then taking a look at best available science regarding climate projections in order to draft this updated version of our chapter. And that is it. You know this schedule, but we're at this point still looking at May 1st, this coming to you for review. Sitting here as long as it needs to sit here, and then on it goes to the city council. So any other questions, I'm happy to answer, Mr. Chair.
Any questions regarding this? No, hearing none. Mr. Wegman?
I had an experience this week. I don't know how many people have ever driven up along the Fraser River. But there's one of the places you drive about a third of the way up is it's called Hell's Gate. And they decided they had one railroad up one side of the river and they had another railroad. They wanted to build another railroad up the other side of the river. And at the Hell's Gate position, when they were building the second railroad, they had a big cave in of all the rocks. And it didn't ultimately stop the water, but what it did do is it stopped all the fish from going up to their habitat. Almost wiped out the sockeye salmon run. And so I guess as we do some of these things, we're you talk multimodal, we're talking about the people. So in this particular case, what they used to go up the Fraser River, people were doing it on canoes, they were walking, and it had to do with the fur trade upstream that they were trying to bring down. And so when we do some of these things, I watch the freeway. If you go to the airport early in the morning, the freeway going north is almost stopped. And so you have a lot of cars putting out exhaust in that one section. You know, I'm just thinking out loud how that would be. So if we could keep the cars moving, would you have less emissions? So as we build choke points, I mean, we do something neat and all of a sudden we create a choke point like this new railroad shut down the salmon issue. So I don't know, how do we integrate all that stuff? Are we smart enough as human beings to do that?
Yeah, I hear you. Any other comments? None? Okay, so how about any reports from the,
Nothing else from us, and Councilmember Boki was unable to attend tonight, so no report from him.
any other reports from hearing and seeing none? Oh, pretty quiet up here. All right, we'll call the meeting adjourned.